I had always heard rumors about the old ski lodge, but like most people, I dismissed them as just stories to scare tourists. The lodge was built decades ago, perched high on the mountain and boasting stunning views and a rich history. My friends and I had planned a ski trip for months, excited to spend a week on the slopes and enjoying the cozy charm of the historic lodge. The first few days were perfect. We spent our days skiing and our evenings by the massive stone fireplace in the lodge's grand room. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, with the smell of pine and the crackling of the fire creating a perfect winter ambience. It was everything we had hoped for. On the fourth night, the weather turned. A heavy snowstorm rolled in, trapping us inside. The lodge staff assured us it was normal for this time of year and that we were safe and well-stocked. We decided to make the best of it, gathering around the fire with hot cocoa and sharing stories. As the night wore on, the power flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The storm outside raged, howling winds battering the windows. It was during one of these power flickers that I first noticed it. A figure standing at the far end of the grand room, just beyond the firelight. I blinked, and it was gone. Did anyone else see that? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. See what? Anna, my friend, replied, looking around. I thought I saw someone over there, I said, pointing to the darkened corner. Owen laughed. It's just your imagination. This place is old and creepy enough without adding ghosts to the mix. But I couldn't shake the feeling. As the night went on, I kept glancing at that corner, half expecting the figure to reappear. Eventually, we all decided to head to our rooms, hoping for a good night's sleep. I was sharing a room with Anna, and we had the window slightly cracked to let in the fresh mountain air. The storm outside was still going strong, and the sound of the wind was almost soothing. We chatted for a while before finally drifting off to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a cold breeze on my face. The window had blown open wider, and as I got up to close it, I saw him again. The same figure, standing just outside, staring in at me. My heart raced, and I slammed the window shut, waking Anna in the process. "What's wrong?" she asked groggily. "There's someone outside," I whispered, my voice shaking. Anna got up and looked out the window, but the figure was gone. "There's no one there. You probably just saw a shadow." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. We locked the window and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easily for me. The image of that figure stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. The next day, I told Owen and David about what I had seen. They teased me about it, but I could see a flicker of concern in their eyes. We decided to stick together for the day, not wanting to venture off alone. The lodge felt different now, less welcoming and more foreboding. That evening, we gathered in the grand room again, trying to shake off the unease. The storm outside had eased a bit, but the power continued to flicker. We sat close to the fire, talking and playing cards, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. At some point, the conversation turned to the history of the lodge. One of the staff members, an older woman named Margaret, joined us. She seemed to know a lot about the place and its past. "Is it true that this lodge is haunted?" David asked, half joking. Margaret smiled, a mysterious glint in her eyes. "There are stories, of course. This place is old, and with age comes history. Some say the spirits of those who perished in the mountains come here to find peace." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Have you ever seen anything?" I asked. Margaret paused, then nodded. "I've seen things. Shadows, figures out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes, guests report strange occurrences, but it's nothing to worry about. The spirits here aren't malicious. They're just lost." Her words were meant to be comforting, but they had the opposite effect. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the old lodge made me jump. I kept the lights on, hoping they would keep whatever I had seen at bay. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but when the footsteps stopped outside our door, I froze. The doorknob rattled, and then there was a soft knock. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no answer. The door slowly creaked open, and there, in the dim light, stood the figure. This time, I saw him clearly. An older man, dressed in clothes that looked decades old, his eyes hollow and sad. He stepped into the room, and I could feel the temperature drop. "Please, leave us alone," I whispered, backing away. Anna woke up, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" The figure moved closer, and I could see his lips moving, but no sound came out. He seemed to be pleading, his expression desperate. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, we packed our things and decided to cut our trip short. The lodge, with all its charm and history, had become a place of terror for us. Before we left, I spoke to Margaret again. She seemed to understand without me having to explain. "He's been here for a long time," she said. "Searching for something, or someone. I'm sorry you had to experience that." We left the lodge, the memories of our encounter still fresh and raw. The drive back down the mountain was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The beauty of the snow-covered landscape couldn't erase the fear we had felt. When I think back to that ski trip, I remember the lodge and the figure who haunted us. It's as if the past lingers in places we least expect, and the spirits of those who came before us still wander, searching for peace. Our ski resort getaway was meant to be a fun break from our busy lives. We were a tight-knit group of friends, me, my best friend Natalie, her boyfriend Robert, and our adventurous friend, John. The resort was renowned for its scenic beauty and challenging slopes, and we were all excited to hit the snow. The first couple of days were perfect. We spent our time skiing, laughing, and enjoying the breathtaking views. The lodge we stayed at was cozy, with a roaring fireplace and hot cocoa always available. It felt like a dream vacation. On the third day, the weather took a turn for the worse. The forecast predicted a heavy snowstorm, but we decided to take advantage of the morning before the storm hit. The slopes were still open, and we figured we had a few hours to enjoy before hunkering down in the lodge. We were wrong. Around noon, the storm rolled in faster than expected. The wind picked up, and the snow started falling heavily, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The resort staff quickly evacuated the slopes, advising everyone to return to the lodge. We were about halfway down a challenging run when the announcement came over the loudspeakers. "Guys, we need to head back," Natalie shouted over the howling wind. "I can barely see anything," Robert added, squinting through the snow. John, always the thrill seeker, suggested we take a shortcut through a less traveled path that would get us back to the lodge faster. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and we followed him, trusting his instincts. The path was narrower and steeper than we anticipated. The trees closed in around us, and the falling snow made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Despite our growing unease, we pushed on, hoping to reach the lodge before the storm worsened. That's when things started to go wrong. Natalie was the first to notice. "Guys, where's John?" We all stopped, looking around frantically. John, who had been leading the way, was nowhere to be seen. The path forked ahead, and it was impossible to tell which direction he had taken. Panic set in as we realized how quickly things could go south in these conditions. "John!" I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the wind. There was no response. "We need to stick together," Robert said firmly. "Let's choose one path and hope it leads us back." We picked the left fork, hoping it would reunite us with John. The snow was relentless, and the path seemed to stretch on forever. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear for John and the realization that we were lost. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin. It was old and dilapidated, but it offered shelter from the storm. We huddled inside, trying to warm up and figure out our next move. "Should we go back out and look for John?" Natalie asked, her voice trembling with worry. "We can't see anything out there," Robert replied. "Let's wait for the storm to pass and then search for him." The hours dragged on. We took turns calling out for John, but there was no sign of him. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the cabin grew colder by the minute. Desperation set in as we realized the gravity of our situation. It was Natalie who first noticed the tracks. They appeared faintly in the snow near the cabin's entrance, leading away into the dense forest. They were ski tracks, and they looked fresh. "Do you think these are John's?" Natalie asked, her eyes wide with hope. "There's only one way to find out," Robert said, his face set with determination. We gathered our things and followed the tracks, praying they would lead us to John. The path wound deeper into the forest, the trees casting eerie shadows in the fading light. The storm had eased slightly, but the cold was still biting. After what felt like hours, we saw a figure ahead. It was John, slumped against a tree, looking exhausted and disoriented. Relief washed over us as we rushed to his side. "John! Thank God we found you!" I exclaimed. John looked up, his face pale and eyes haunted. I got lost," he stammered. "I couldn't find my way back. I kept seeing someone, a figure in the trees." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," John replied, his voice shaky. "It was like someone was watching me, following me. Every time I turned around, they were gone." We helped John to his feet, deciding it was time to head back to the lodge as quickly as possible. The tracks had led us this far, and we hoped they would guide us back to safety. The journey was tense, every rustle of the wind or crack of a branch making us jump. Finally, we reached the edge of the forest and saw the lodge's lights in the distance. The sense of relief was overwhelming. We made it back, exhausted but safe, and immediately reported our experience to the resort staff. "This isn't the first time we've heard stories like this," one of the staff members admitted. "There are old legends about this area, tales of lost skiers and mysterious figures in the woods. We never got a clear explanation for what happened that day, but when I think back to that ski trip, I remember the fear and the uncertainty. The resort's beauty and the excitement of skiing were overshadowed by the terror we experienced. It was a lesson in the unpredictability of nature and the importance of staying vigilant." I remember it vividly, even though it's been years. Our ski trip to a remote cabin in the mountains was supposed to be a fun getaway. It was just me and 3 of my closest friends. We had all been looking forward to this trip for months. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods and miles away from the nearest town, promised the perfect escape. The first day was perfect. We arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the snow-covered landscape. We unpacked quickly and settled in, lighting a fire in the stone fireplace and cooking a simple dinner. The cabin was cozy, with wooden beams, plush furniture, and a view that took your breath away. After dinner, we played board games, laughed, and told stories late into the night. The storm began around midnight. The wind howled outside, and the snow started falling heavily, covering the ground in a thick, white blanket. We all thought it was beautiful and added to the adventure of our trip. Little did we know, it was just the beginning of a nightmare. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, a distinct knock at the door. My heart started pounding in my chest. Who could it be at this hour in such a remote location? I got out of bed and crept to the window, peeking through the curtains. The porch light cast an eerie glow on the snow, but there was no one there. I told myself it was just my imagination and went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The knocking started again, louder and more insistent this time. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Alex, Maria, and Mike were all awake now, huddled together in the living room. We decided to check the door together. As we approached, the knocking stopped. Alex, the bravest of us, slowly opened the door, but there was no one outside, just the howling wind and swirling snow. We tried to laugh it off, but the atmosphere had changed. The cabin, once cozy and warm, now felt oppressive and menacing. We checked all the windows and doors, making sure they were locked, and returned to the living room, deciding to stay together for the rest of the night. An hour passed, and we were starting to relax when the knocking resumed, this time on the back door. It was louder, more forceful. We grabbed kitchen knives for protection and cautiously approached. The back door, just like the front, showed no signs of an intruder. The snow outside was undisturbed. The tension in the cabin was palpable. We decided to stay awake, keeping the fire burning and our eyes peeled. Maria suggested we call the local authorities, but our phones had no signal, and the landline in the cabin was dead. We were truly isolated. Around 4 a.m., the knocking stopped, but we were too on edge to sleep. We took turns keeping watch, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. Just as dawn was breaking, we heard a new sound, footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was walking back and forth, right above us. Panic set in. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't leave the cabin in the middle of a snowstorm, and we had no way of calling for help. The footsteps continued, each one a reminder of our helplessness. Alex suggested we stay quiet and wait it out, hoping whoever was tormenting us would leave. The footsteps eventually ceased, but the damage was done. We were all terrified, sleep-deprived, and desperate to leave. As soon as the storm let up, we packed our things and made a run for the car. The drive down the mountain was nerve-wracking, each of us constantly looking over our shoulders, fearing the worst. When we finally reached town, we went straight to the police station. They listened to our story with a mix of skepticism and concern. A patrol was sent to check the cabin, but they found no evidence of an intruder. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. We never found out who, or what, had visited us that night. The experience left us all shaken. Even now, years later, I can't stay in a remote cabin without feeling a chill run down my spine at the slightest sound. What was meant to be a fun, relaxing ski trip turned into a harrowing ordeal that none of us will ever forget. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved skiing. There's something about the cold mountain air, the rush of speeding down a slope, and the crisp white snow that makes me feel alive. This particular ski trip, however, changed my view on skiing forever. It was late February when me and my friends decided to head up to a ski resort nestled deep in the Rockies. The resort was known for its challenging slopes and scenic beauty, but it also had a reputation for its secluded location. Cell service was spotty, and the nearest town was a good hour's drive away. We didn't mind. In fact, we looked forward to the isolation. We arrived on a Thursday evening. Our cabin was rustic but cozy, with a large fireplace and enough space for the 6 of us. After unpacking, we settled in for a night of laughter, card games, and planning our ski routes for the next day. The first day on the slopes was perfect. The snow was fresh, the weather clear, and the views breathtaking. We spent hours skiing, only stopping for quick breaks to warm up with hot chocolate. As evening approached, we headed back to the cabin, exhausted but happy. After dinner, we gathered around the fireplace to share stories and jokes. The conversation eventually turned to the local legends and ghost stories of the area. Matt, always the prankster, decided to share the most famous one. "Have you guys heard about the frozen tracks?" he asked, his voice low and dramatic. We all shook our heads, intrigued. It said that a long time ago, a skier went missing during a storm. They found his tracks leading deep into the woods, but they just stopped abruptly. No one ever found him. Some say his spirit still wanders the mountains, leaving behind frozen tracks in the snow. We laughed it off, but the story left a lingering unease. The thought of a lost soul wandering the snow-covered mountains was eerie, to say the least. The next day, the weather changed. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up, making the slopes less inviting. Determined to make the most of our trip, we decided to stick to the easier runs and stay closer to the cabin. As the day progressed, the storm worsened, and we eventually decided to call it quits and head back. That evening, as the storm raged outside, we huddled around the fireplace once more. The wind howled, and the snow pelted against the windows. It was the perfect setting for more ghost stories, but we opted for board games instead, trying to keep the mood light. Around midnight, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The storm had calmed slightly, and the snow fell gently, creating a beautiful landscape. As I stood there, breathing in the crisp air, I noticed something strange. Just beyond the edge of the cabin's porch, there were tracks in the snow. They looked like ski tracks, leading away from the cabin and into the woods. My heart skipped a beat as Matt's story flashed through my mind. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was probably just one of my friends playing a prank. I turned to go back inside, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my coat and a flashlight and followed the tracks. They led me deeper into the woods, winding through trees and over small hills. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. The tracks seemed to go on forever, untouched by the falling snow. After what felt like an eternity, the tracks suddenly stopped. There, in the middle of the woods, the tracks just ended, as if the skier had vanished into thin air. I stood there, my breath visible in the cold air, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The silence was deafening, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I turned to head back, my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, I saw him. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing at the edge of the clearing. He wore old-fashioned ski gear, and his eyes seemed hollow, almost lifeless. He stared at me, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanished. I ran back to the cabin, my heart pounding. Bursting through the door, I found my friends still gathered around the fire. "What happened?" Maria asked, seeing the panic on my face. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. I told them about the tracks, the figure, and how he disappeared. They looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. "It's probably just your imagination," Matt said, though he didn't sound convinced. We decided to go out together to see the tracks, but when we reached the spot, they were gone. The snow had covered them completely, and there was no sign of anyone ever being there. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but the experience stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw was real. The story of the frozen tracks became more than just a legend to me. We left the cabin with mixed emotions. The beauty of the mountains was undeniable, but the memory of that night cast a shadow over our trip. I haven't been back to that ski resort since, and I'm not sure I ever will. The mountains hold many secrets, and some are better left undiscovered. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button for more terrifying tales. Don't miss our next video, for disturbing true Walmart horror stories. They get increasingly more disturbing, where we dive into shocking and unsettling incidents that took place in one of the most familiar places. These stories will leave you more cautious on your next shopping trip. See you in the next video.